Hey folks, Jackdaw here. Here we are, 1 year later. Dragon's Dogma 2, the long-awaited, highly anticipated, borderline mythical sequel to Capcom's cult classic. It has been out in the wild for 12 months now, and yet, somehow, it feels like the game has barely made a dent in the RPG space. Throughout the time since its release, I have been constantly asking myself, where is this DLC? When are we going to get an expansion? And I've been fooled way too many times now with a false sense of hope. Unless Capcom miraculously decides to have some surprise planned reveal for the game's 1 year anniversary, Dragon's Dogma 2 has been eerily silent. The original game had Dark Arisen, a massive expansion that overhauled everything, refined what people loved, and added a brutal endgame. It was a textbook example of how to take a great but flawed game and push it to true cult greatness. But with Dragon's Dogma 2, we've had nothing. A few patches here and there, sure, but no major updates, no expansion news, no word from Capcom. Just a brigade of clown makeup and wigs at every Capcom-related press event. So what happened? Why does it feel like Dragon's Dogma 2 came and went? Did it actually achieve what Game Director Hideaki Itsuno set out to do in the first place? Or did something go wrong along the way? Let's talk about it. First, let's get one thing straight. Dragon's Dogma 2 was not a rushed job. If anything, it's the opposite. Itsuno had been waiting for the right time, the right hardware, and the right opportunity to finally deliver the game that he had envisioned back in 2012. And he's been very open about this. After the original Dragon's Dogma released, his team immediately had bigger ideas, more lands, deeper mechanics, crazier encounters. But Capcom wasn't ready at the time to greenlight a sequel. Instead, Itsuno was then pulled into Devil May Cry 5, a game that turned out to be phenomenal. But that also meant Dragon's Dogma was left to languish in cult status for years. Then the hardware finally caught up. Itsuno dusted off the original design documents and got to work. For years, he has teased elements of what Dragon's Dogma was supposed to always be about. Alternate worlds, hidden kingdoms, even a battle on the bloody moon. And there was always supposed to be a playable lion-like beast race, scrapped from the first game but finally making its way into Dragon's Dogma 2. The dream was back on. And yet, Dragon's Dogma 2, for all of its ambitions, it still feels incomplete. Which is ironic, because Itsuno himself said that this was the game he always wanted to make. So, what went wrong? Well, back in 2013, leaked Capcom presentation slides revealed the original scope of Dragon's Dogma. And it was never meant just to be down to the single kingdom of Gransys. It was supposed to span multiple lands, an expanding world that would eventually take the Arisen beyond the Shadow Fort, into the homeland of goblins, to an elven enclave in the deep forests, even to a distant northern island where the final battle with the dragon would unfold. Of course, the grandest ideas of them all was a journey to the moon, where players would uncover the true nature of the eternal war. It was insane, and none of that happened. Instead, we got Dragon's Dogma 2, a game that, while undeniably beautiful, feels oddly restrained. Capcom finally gave Itsuno the hardware to realize his vision, but the end result feels smaller. Like we're only seeing a fraction of what was once imagined. There are constant hints at a bigger world, NPCs mentioning distant lands, locked tunnels that seem like they should have led somewhere else, entire regions left untouched. Even Daemon, the final boss of Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen, appears in a loading screen of DD2. And yet, of course, he's nowhere to be found in the game itself. We have a Hydra mention. A full-scale Hydra boss exists in the game's files, yet you could never actually fight Hydra in DD2. So, was this cut content? Is it a scrapped dungeon? Or was it meant to be a part of a DLC-sized expansion that we still haven't seen? It all really doesn't help the rumours that have been swirling that Capcom have quietly shelved a major Dragon's Dogma Dogma 2 expansion in favour of Monster Hunter Wilds. If that's true, then DD2 might have been a victim of corporate reshuffling all this time. But let's get back to what we did get, instead of talking about hypotheticals. And one of the biggest issues right out of the gate with Dragon's Dogma 2 is its tedium traversal. Capcom doubled down on the idea that you should absolutely live in this world. That every quest, big or small, should be an adventure in its own right. That travel should feel dangerous, exciting, ultimately unpredictable. Itsuno himself referring to other games being too boring. This, in principle, is such an admirable, ballsy design choice, but in execution, it's an absolute bloody slog. The map of DD2 is 4 times the size of the original. The ox carts, the game's equivalent of fast travel, they're unreliable and they often get ambushed by monsters anyway. And while walking everywhere was charming in Dark Arisen, where the map was dense and compact, in DD2 it just feels like artificial padding. And don't even get me started on the amount of times I had to trudge back and forth from Vernworth, fending off the same bloody goblin encounters for the 100th time. It is enough to make me weep. It would have been so much better if once you killed them, they didn't respawn. There would have been a sense of agency there too. As I further explore, the more enemies I kill, the less they respawn, and this is the problem. If you're gonna have limited fast travel, the world needs to then compensate for it. Look at Dark Souls. The early game is designed like an intricate labyrinth, where shortcuts constantly loop back to familiar places. The world folds in on itself in a way that makes traversal itself a reward, whereas Dragon's Dogma 2 just doesn't have that. It's vast, sprawling, and spread way too thin. And it's fun at first, but once you hit past 20 hours, it loses its charm. So much so that I just ended up cursing the design choices that led me to every single godforsaken trail. But let's give the game its due credit. Combat, as always in Dragon's Dogma, is its strongest feature, especially in 2. The game feels incredible in motion. The weight of your weapons, the impact of spells, the way enemies react to your attacks, it is so damn satisfying. And I think, thankfully, the thing that I love the most is the fact that the weirdness is all still intact. The bizarre, almost slapstick humour remains one of the game's greatest charms. Whether it's pawns delivering hilarious, stiff banter, cheering you on mid-battle, or the absurd joy of high-fiving one of them after you've defeated a massive ogre, and the fact that you can still pick up and carry just about anyone, with NPCs squirming in your grasp as they protest being hoisted into the air like an unruly cat. It is delightfully unhinged as ever, and I love it for that. And that ties into the ability to then climb enemies, proper Shadow of the Colossus style. It remains one of the coolest mechanics in any RPG, and it's cool to see other RPGs be inspired by this. The sheer spectacle of taking down a griffin while it's mid-air, or launching a cyclops off a cliff, it never really got old. And the vocations are chef's kiss. Magic Archer particularly, so bloody fun, never got boring. But despite all of this, there still feels like there's something missing. Even the amount of vocations is quite odd to only have 2 advanced vocations, and the enemy variety is surprisingly limited. You'll fight goblins, a lot of goblins, and you'll fight bandits, a lot of bandits. And after a while, it starts to feel like you're running into the same encounters over and over again. It's also so baffling that the game doesn't have a dodge roll by default. Like, what? Every other modern RPG has a dodge. Dragon's Dogma 2 though, nah. Just stand there and take it. Unless of course you are playing a specific vocation, in which, congratulations, you've unlocked basic evasive movements. It's little things like this that hold the game back from true greatness. And now let's talk about the story, or should we just say rather lack of it. The game starts strong. You arrive in Vernworth to confirm your claim as the true Arisen, guided by some godlike being called the Pathfinder. And once you get to the human capital, you find that a false Arisen has manipulated pawns with the God's Way, setting up an intriguing courtly plotline that is immediately dropped once you are shuffled to another kingdom, and then by the time you actually do return to Vernworth, the entire nobility storyline didn't even matter in the first place. Characters who seemed like they were going to be major players just vanish. Plotlines build to something and go immediately nowhere. Take Disa, for example, the supposed power behind Vermund's throne. In DD2, you don't even meet her until post-game. Compare that to Dragon's Dogma 1, where the Duke is established within the first 2 hours as a central figure in the main quest. Why is one of the most important figures in the kingdom relegated to an afterthought? Then there's Nadinia, the High Priestess of Batal, very much acting in the same way as Disa. You'd think that a story about two conflicting kingdoms, one built around divine prophecy and the other about reforging fate, you'd think that Batal's religious leader might have some kind of role in the main plot, wouldn't you? But no, she's completely absent. And there are so many aspects of Batal that feel absent to this game. That's where I definitely feel the cut-off. Why do we work with Theseus when he and Disa literally tried to kill us at the start of the game? And then there's the Lambent Flame, Batal's dominant religion, seemingly poised to play a significant role in the narrative, especially in the build-up with the marketing. But it never really does. It's there, it's referenced, you can go and see it, you can go to the temple, but it has no tangible weight in the actual story. It's all smoke, no fire. What was the point? Now I get it, nobody plays Dragon's Dogma for its story, but as a lore fanatic myself, and when I see connections that don't even line up, it's frustrating. Even Dragon's Dogma 1 had a stronger narrative payoff. You confront the Duke, you unravel the mysteries of the Everfall, and ultimately face off against the Seneschal in a climactic battle that feels earned. In DD2, it feels like Capcom ran out of time. So what happened to Dragon's Dogma 2? Well, like all game dev, it's complicated. On one hand, it's a game that only Dragon's Dogma could be. Niche, stubborn, weird, bold, brilliant. It refuses to conform, refusing to chase current and established RPG trends, refusing to just be anything other than exactly what it wants to be, which is admirable. In a space filled with checklist-driven open worlds and homogenized design, that is something truly worth celebrating, its own individuality. But then on the other hand, it is frustrating. By not chasing trends, some features like not even having a dodge roll are just a plain nuisance. And it feels incomplete. That's the biggest thing for me. The world is too big for its own good, stretching itself thin in ways that make traversal a chore rather than actually fun, which is what Itsuno set out to do in the first place. It's ironic that it's instead become boring. And the story has ideas and it wants to build those ideas further into something grand, but it stumbles all over the place, leaving many threads completely unresolved and so many characters forgotten. By doubling down on its commitment to immersion, it comes at the expense of the player's convenience. And I would say, to end, most damning of it all, Dragon's Dogma 2 has just fizzled out. Few updates, no expansion, no roadmap, no sign that Capcom is even thinking about supporting the game in the way it so clearly needs to be supported. Even more so considering that Itsuno did actually leave Capcom last year anyway. So a year later, it's hard not to feel like Dragon's Dogma 2 was a bit of a missed opportunity. A game that could have been legendary, it had the ambition, and it should have cemented itself as one of the greats just because of its entire design philosophy, actually aiming to create a game built on fun, one that is truly unique in its own way, with its own very esoteric features, but instead, it just was. And that might be the biggest tragedy of all. Now, as much as I criticize it a year on, I still find myself hoping that Capcom isn't finished, that Dragon's Dogma 2 hasn't been quietly abandoned in favour of its bigger, safer franchises. That just maybe we'll see the Dark Arisen moment this game desperately needs. A DLC that doesn't just add content but instead re-establishes the entire Dragon's Dogma experience. When I say this, I'm picturing something like Phantom Liberty, an expansion that not only introduced a new epic quest, but fundamentally improved Cyberpunk's systems, polish and balance. It was a second chance and it absolutely worked. It took Cyberpunk from a cautionary buggy tale to an actual redemption story. And mind you, that DLC didn't come out until 3 years after the initial launch, so maybe that's what Dragon's Dogma 2 needs. Maybe we just need to be patient. Maybe, but with every passing month of silence, that hope still feels more and more like wishful thinking. Either way, I would love some new content to pull me back into the world of DD2 to give it a second chance. What are your thoughts 1 year after the release of Dragon's Dogma 2? Do you have any ideas on DLC? Have you seen any other rumours, data mined content, any other indicators that we actually might get DD2 DLC? Or are we all ultimately crazy at this point? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts down below. For the latest on loads of upcoming fantasy RPGs, you are already in the right place. I have been Jackdaw, and I should go. Whoa, 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 whoa.